"Dr. Patterson, we need to put him in assisted care immediately," my son Michael said across the hospital consultation room, his voice carrying the authority of someone making decisions about livestock. "He's declined significantly. The family agrees he's unsafe alone." I was sitting 3 feet away from them when Michael decided my fate without asking my opinion. 30 minutes after what was supposed to be a routine checkup, and he was arranging my disappearance into institutional care like I was already dead. The same hospital where my late wife Barbara had received her cancer treatment 2 years earlier, where I'd held her hand during chemotherapy sessions, where Michael had promised me he'd always make sure I stayed independent as long as possible. In his mind, I wasn't a father anymore, just a liability to be managed and parked somewhere out of sight. "Put him in assisted care," I heard him tell Dr. Patterson, his voice matter-of-fact, calculating. "He's been making poor decisions, forgetting important appointments, showing signs of dementia. The family agrees it's time for professional supervision." The family. As if there was anyone left to agree with him besides his wife Amanda and her mother Eleanor, who'd been circling my independence like vultures since Barbara's funeral. In that moment, I heard Barbara's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. "Henry, promise me you'll never let anyone take away your dignity. If Michael ever tries to control your life, instead of supporting it, you show him exactly who raised him." I understood perfectly what Michael was really doing. What he didn't know was what I'd discovered about his family decisions and those safety concerns he'd been fabricating, or what I'd been preparing while they thought I was just a grieving widower who'd quietly accept whatever institutional placement they arranged. Barbara's medical power of attorney papers, the cognitive assessment results I'd requested independently, the legal documents Michael had forgotten existed, hidden in the safe Barbara and I had installed 43 years ago. Michael was about to learn that his father had been planning his own defense while they plotted his disappearance into assisted care. He thought he'd cornered a helpless old man. He had no idea he'd just awakened someone who understood exactly how elder abuse worked and how to stop it. What Michael didn't know was that I'd already tested my own cognition with an independent doctor, and I'd passed with perfect scores. It had really started 4 months earlier, when Michael began suggesting that I was struggling to maintain basic daily functions. 4 months before the hospital meeting, Michael had started bringing Amanda and her mother Eleanor to our monthly dinners with what they called wellness conversations about my living situation. That particular evening, I remember Eleanor's sharp eyes scanning my kitchen for signs of neglect, while Amanda made notes on her phone about my concerning behaviors. "Dad's been making some questionable decisions," Michael explained to Eleanor across my dining room table. "He forgets everything. And it's getting worse," Amanda added, making notes on her phone. "He can't even handle a simple pill schedule. We cannot delay this placement." "We all agree he's declining," she continued, her voice growing more insistent. "Mr. Henry, elderly people don't recognize when they need help," Eleanor said, her voice clinical. "He needs supervision, urgently." The way she said elderly people felt clinical, dismissive, like I'd already been diagnosed with incompetence. I watched Michael nod seriously while Amanda documented my responses, creating a medical record of supposed mental decline that existed only in their observations. Was this really my son? When did I become something to manage instead of someone to respect? Later, cleaning up dinner dishes, I realized what was happening. They weren't monitoring my health. They were building justification for decisions they'd apparently already made about my future. Most people would have confronted them directly, but something in me chose to stay quiet and observe. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was the first time they tried to establish medical grounds for removing my independence. What Michael didn't realize was that his father wasn't just Henry, retired postal supervisor who'd spent 36 years managing mail distribution routes for the regional office. I'd always been methodical about documentation, always kept careful records, always understood the importance of paperwork when people questioned your competence or authority. The conversation that changed everything happened 8 weeks before the hospital meeting when I returned from grocery shopping to find Michael, Amanda, and someone introduced as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, geriatric assessment specialist, sitting in my living room with evaluation material. "Dad, Dr. Mitchell conducts cognitive assessments that help families understand when elderly relatives need additional care coordination," Michael said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We've been concerned about some changes we've observed. and she can provide professional guidance. I recognized the setup immediately. This wasn't a medical consultation. This was an intervention designed to produce predetermined results. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward with testing materials that seemed designed to confuse rather than assess. Mr. Henry, these evaluations measure memory function, decision-making capacity, and daily living skills. The results help determine appropriate care levels. I stayed calm and cooperative, but I noticed several irregularities in their approach. The questions seemed scripted to highlight confusion rather than competence. The testing environment felt coercive rather than supportive. Based on family observations and preliminary assessment, we're seeing patterns consistent with early cognitive impairment, Dr. Mitchell explained to Michael and Amanda as if I weren't sitting right there. I'd recommend comprehensive evaluation for assisted living placement. Something about their coordination reminded me of procedures I'd witnessed during Barbara's medical treatment, except this felt manipulative rather than therapeutic. They weren't assessing my capabilities. They were manufacturing evidence of incapacity. But what I discovered next would change everything. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed every document I'd found, hidden in Michael's car during their assessment meeting. Medical consultation forms with predetermined conclusions about my mental state. Assisted living facility brochures with application paperwork already partially completed. Property transfer documents that would give Michael legal authority over my house worth $380,000. Financial power of attorney forms that would grant him access to my retirement accounts totaling $290,000. Patient cognitive decline assessment form 14C shows significant deterioration requiring immediate supervised care, Dr. Mitchell had written in her medical necessity protocol report. Family documentation report indicates dangerous behaviors, including medication errors, financial confusion, and social isolation consistent with dementia. Progression. But Michael had miscalculated something crucial. What he didn't know was that Barbara and I had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this scenario. I adjusted my reading glasses and looked at the documents I'd kept locked in our bedroom safe. Independent cognitive assessment report completed with Dr. Williams. Perfect scores across every evaluation. Professional mental competency certification dated just 6 weeks earlier. Barbara's detailed legal instructions about protecting my independence. Medical power of attorney documentation that explicitly prevented family members from making unilateral care decisions. A living will that specified my right to remain in my own home as long as I maintained cognitive function. By the time I finished reviewing everything, I realized the truth. Michael didn't want to care for me. He wanted to inherit from me while I was still alive. Barbara would never forgive this betrayal. Michael made his fatal mistake when he assumed I would simply accept their medical opinions without seeking independent verification. Instead, I'd spent 8 weeks documenting their manipulation while building my own legal defense. Henry's not going to just accept institutional placement because they say it's necessary. I'd told my attorney Barbara had insisted I retain James Patterson, no relation to the doctor. But Michael doesn't need to know I'm building a competency file. What Michael didn't know was that I'd spent 36 years in postal service management, which meant I understood bureaucratic procedures, documentation requirements, and administrative fraud better than he realized. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They forgot I'd spent 4 decades managing complex logistical systems and supervising people who tried to manipulate procedures for personal advantage. Dr. Williams looked at me across his office and said quietly, "Henry, what they're attempting isn't just inappropriate, it's elder abuse disguised as medical care. My son's assisted living plan had become a systematic attack on my legal rights and personal autonomy. The evidence stacked up quickly. Michael had built his case on lies, but he'd made procedural errors that any experienced administrator would identify immediately. The assessment protocols violate standard geriatric evaluation guidelines," Dr. Williams confirmed. Dr. Mitchell's credentials don't match state licensing requirements for competency determination. Michael had attempted medical fraud against someone whose career had been devoted to identifying procedural violations and administrative manipulation. Anyone who's ever been underestimated because of their age knows exactly why I kept fighting. I knew Michael's scheme was finished when James contacted the state elder abuse hotline and medical licensing board. The investigation expanded rapidly once we'd reported systematic medical fraud involving falsified competency evaluations. "Henry, we've identified a comprehensive elder abuse conspiracy," Detective Laura explained during our meeting. "Fraudulent medical assessments, unauthorized care placement, systematic preparation for asset control through manipulated legal proceedings." I kept asking myself, when did my son start seeing me as an obstacle to eliminate instead of a father to respect? Michael had collaborated with Amanda and Eleanor to create medical documentation, targeting not just my independence, but my fundamental right to control my own life decisions. We've discovered Dr. Mitchell has been providing fraudulent evaluations for multiple families, attempting to gain control over elderly relatives, Detective Laura added. This appears to be an organized scheme targeting widowed seniors. I spread evidence across James's desk, Michael's correspondence with assisted living facilities, Amanda's financial projections showing how they'd use my assets, Dr. Mitchell's, fabricated medical reports that contradicted my actual health records. The assisted living placement represents systematic elder abuse, James noted, creating false medical necessity for institutional care while gaining unauthorized access to victims' financial resources. Michael didn't understand that manipulating medical evaluations requires legitimate medical authority and ethical oversight, neither of which his conspiracy possessed. What truly sealed his fate was discovering they'd already made deposits at assisted living facilities, expecting to complete my placement within weeks. That was their first mistake, but not their last. That week, I observed Michael's confidence crumbling as their medical fraud scheme encountered legitimate oversight. Dr. Williams had reported Dr. Mitchell's irregular credentials to state licensing authorities. Real geriatric specialists began questioning their assessment methods. The state licensing board is demanding a full audit of Dr. Mitchell's evaluations, Michael mentioned during a panicked phone call, his voice tight with anxiety. They're reviewing every case she's handled in the past 2 years. Dad, they're saying her credentials might be fraudulent. What kind of audit? I asked, knowing exactly what regulatory investigation was dismantling their conspiracy. They want to interview all her patients, Michael replied, his professional composure finally cracking. They want to verify the medical necessity of every placement recommendation she's made. Amanda broke down crying when they received the first violation letter. "Henry, the state board has suspended Dr. Mitchell's practice," she sobbed into the phone during what she thought was a private call. "They're investigating her for issuing fraudulent evaluations. What if they find out about the deposits we made at Sunset Manor? Dr. Mitchell isn't returning our calls," Eleanor whispered frantically to Amanda outside my house during what they thought was a routine visit. "The licensing board has opened a criminal investigation. If they trace this back to us, we could face elder abuse charges. We need to distance ourselves from this immediately." Michael stopped answering calls from assisted living facilities, demanding explanations for their falsified medical documentation. Vendors called saying the paperwork didn't match state requirements for involuntary placement. The facility administrator at Sunset Manor left increasingly aggressive voicemails about their $5,000 deposit for my confirmed placement. And if you think the medical fraud was bad, what happened next would have made anyone question their own family. When licensing investigators began calling to verify my actual cognitive status, Michael's explanations became desperate. "There must be some mistake," he told the investigator. "Dr. Mitchell assured us the evaluation was comprehensive and legitimate. The whole plan is collapsing," I overheard Eleanor telling someone on the phone late one evening. "Henry's independent testing came back perfect. The state knows Dr. Mitchell was issuing fraudulent evaluations. We're looking at criminal charges if they connect us to this scheme." Amanda started suggesting they might need to take a long vacation until this blows over. Michael began researching whether they could withdraw their facility deposits without triggering additional scrutiny. Michael was learning that medical fraud creates paper trails that experienced investigators follow directly to prosecution. What confirmed their complete panic was when they decided to expedite my placement by taking me to Dr. Patterson for an urgent medical consultation. The night before the hospital confrontation, I sat in my study reviewing the comprehensive legal file that would expose Michael's elder abuse scheme and protect my independence permanently. I pulled out Barbara's final letter, written during her last week of hospice care. "Henry, our son has a good heart. But some people lose their way when money becomes more important than love. If Michael ever tries to control your life instead of supporting your choices, remember that you raised him to be better than that. Fight for yourself the way you fought for us. The evidence revealed calculated manipulation that transcended family concern. Michael had been planning to institutionalize me while accessing my life savings, all disguised as medical necessity and family responsibility. Michael's scheme represents systematic elder abuse involving medical fraud, Detective Laura had explained during our coordination meeting. Fraudulent competency evaluations, unauthorized facility placement, conspiracy to gain financial control. Some postal supervisors spend their careers understanding exactly how administrative fraud works and how to protect vulnerable people from systematic exploitation. Tomorrow, Michael would walk into that hospital thinking he was completing my institutional placement. He didn't know he was walking into a comprehensive elder abuse investigation. The confrontation came when Michael, Amanda, and Dr. Patterson met in the hospital consultation room, expecting to finalize arrangements for my immediate assisted living placement. Dr. Patterson, as we discussed, my father's cognitive decline has accelerated, Michael began, settling into his chair with obvious confidence. The family assessment indicates he can no longer safely maintain independent living. Henry can't even manage his medication schedule, Amanda interrupted, leaning forward aggressively. Last week he forgot to take his heart medication for 3 days straight. We need supervised care placement immediately. The assisted living facility we've selected has an immediate opening, she continued, presenting brochures for institutions I'd never agreed to consider. Dr. Mitchell's evaluation confirms he requires comprehensive daily assistance. I looked at them calmly from my chair beside Dr. Patterson's desk, the same desk where Barbara had received her cancer diagnosis 2 years earlier. Before we discuss any placement, I said quietly, there's something important you should know about your father's actual medical status. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the legal documents James had prepared, placed them on the desk between us. The independent cognitive assessment showing perfect mental competence, the medical licensing board's report confirming Dr. Mitchell's fraudulent credentials, the elder abuse investigation file documenting their systematic manipulation of medical evaluations. Michael, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, you forgot that your father spent 36 years identifying administrative fraud and procedural violations. His face went completely white as he read the legal papers. Dad, what is this? Michael's voice cracked as he picked up the competency assessment. When did you get tested? How could he ask me that, after everything he'd planned to do to me? The medical evaluations you fabricated contradict my actual health status, I continued. The assisted living placement you arranged was based on fraudulent documentation. That's impossible, Amanda snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. Dr. Mitchell is a licensed professional. She wouldn't falsify anything. And I've been working with law enforcement since you first brought Dr. Mitchell into my house. Amanda tried to gather the documents, but her hands were shaking too badly to manage the papers. Dr. Patterson was reading the medical licensing report with growing alarm. Detective Laura was already approaching the consultation room, her badge visible as she knocked on the door. What finally ended their scheme was the moment they realized their medical fraud had been exposed by the same person they'd tried to have declared incompetent. Justice came quietly when the district attorney filed comprehensive charges against Michael, Amanda, and Dr. Mitchell 8 weeks after the hospital confrontation. All three faced multiple felony counts related to elder abuse, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. The defendants systematically targeted an elderly widower through fabricated medical assessments, the prosecutor announced. They face 10 to 15 years in state prison. Dr. Mitchell's medical credentials were exposed as completely fraudulent. Michael's employment was terminated when his employer learned about the elder abuse charges. Amanda's participation in the conspiracy destroyed their marriage within months. 6 months later, Michael knocked on my front door on a quiet Tuesday evening. We sat on Barbara's front porch, watching the sunset. Dad, I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice thick with shame. I lost sight of who you raised me to be. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting myself from having to see you age. Your mother always said you had potential for wisdom, I told him. She also said wisdom sometimes comes through consequences rather than advice. I wish Barbara had lived to see him choose accountability over denial. Sometimes the quietest justice comes from simply remembering who you are when others choose to forget. Michael calculated that his elderly father would be easy prey for medical manipulation disguised as family concern, but he'd forgotten the most important detail about his target. When Michael told the doctor to put him in assisted care, he thought he was arranging institutional placement for a confused old man. He didn't know I understood administrative fraud better than he understood medical procedures. My response wasn't what he expected. My response was justice served through proper legal channels, systematic investigation, and complete protection of my independence and dignity. The conspiracy lasted 8 weeks. The criminal charges will follow them for 15 years. And every morning I wake up in the house Barbara and I shared for 43 years, grateful that some families can survive people who mistake aging for incompetence. He tried to put me away. Instead, he put himself behind bars. People forget that aging doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you quieter. And quiet men carry the sharpest truth. Justice stays quiet until it needs to speak. Then it speaks loud enough for everyone to hear.